What kind of year should we be anticipating for Daniyel Ngata in 2022? We're going to talk about that in just a moment on the Locked On Sun Devils podcast.
You are Locked On Sun Devils, your daily podcast on the Arizona State Sun Devils, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
And welcome back to the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. My name is Richie Bradshaw, and I will be your guide for everything Arizona State Sun Devils. Thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Remember, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, if you would like to check us out in a visual platform. But wherever you do get those podcasts, make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button and turn on those notifications so that you get an update every time we put out a new episode. We're going to go ahead and continue our series of breaking down some statistics as to what we should expect our guys to be putting out in 2022. Today, we're going over to Daniyel Ngata, one of the biggest names, that's the word I'm looking for, in Arizona State's backfield, along with Xazavien Valladay, as the potential 1-2 punch following the departures of both Rachaad White and Deamonte Trayanum. Looking at Ngata, this is the veteran guy. He's coming back for his third season. He spent his first two seasons with Arizona State and has essentially been in like this third string kind of role for the team with, again, both Rachaad White and Trayanum ahead of him. Nonetheless, he's found a way to produce on just 82 career touches, 82 career carries. He's turned it into 417 yards and 5 touchdowns. Last year alone in 10 games, he toted it 56 times as the third running back, turned it into 309 yards and 4 touchdowns. So this guy is definitely a very, very good running back, and he's someone that we should be very, very excited to watch this year. I think that Daniyel Ngata's floor is probably what Trayanum was able to do over the course of his career with the Sun Devils, which in those 2 seasons, Trayanum tagged on just shy of 700 rushing yards and 10 touchdowns. 2 seasons. I think that Ngata is as good as Chip is in a worst case scenario. I do really think that he is just a very, very special player, though. I've gone on record before saying that he really reminds me of Eno Benjamin. Part of that is because of the build, admittedly, but another part of that is I just feel like they're these compact, hard-nosed, downhill style running backs. And I think that what Ngata has is very, very similar to what Eno had. And if you can harness that same energy, then you've got yourself a very special running back. So, looking at what I'm projecting him this year. First segment, we're going to talk about the rushing yards, rushing touchdowns. So, taking a look at the rushing yards, to me, when we're talking about predicting the stats, this is going to be the same thing for Xazavien Valladay, is the high is going to be if he is the lead dog, no competition. The low is if he's second on the team and like definitively second. And my prediction is going to be kind of an even between both of them because I think at the end of the day, it's a 1A, 1B kind of backfield. Until further notice, that's the way I'm rolling with it. So if he is the sole owner of this backfield, I think he's a 1,200-yard rusher. I think this is a guy who's going to put up big-time numbers for Arizona State. Look, the Sun Devils are going to be trying to run the football as much as they possibly can this year to mask what could be, potentially a lackluster receiving room or even just a receiving game or passing game that's just not up to par with what they could do on the ground. So I think that best case scenario for Ngata, if he is the sole owner of this backfield, 1,200 yards. The lowest I see is still pretty good. I think he's still a 600-yard rusher. And my logic behind that is because Trayanum was in a part-time role for the team and only appeared in 9 games, part of that due to injury. But in those 9 games, he still tagged on 402 rushing yards. So I think that Arizona State, even if, Valladay does become the running back in this backfield, like the de facto number 1 guy, there's still a very nice role for Ngata to fall into here. So for my prediction, I'm going to go 700. It is considerably lower than my high. It's only a little bit higher than my low, but I think that ultimately you're going to have like three guys in that 700 to 800 range. I don't know that you have 1,000-yard runner, mainly because you don't need to have 1,000-yard runner this year. And that's not a bad thing. Woo, excuse me. That's not a bad thing. It's a very good problem to have for Arizona State. And because of that, I feel like you're going to have some very, very, very good like not production, efficiency. That's the word I'm looking for. Very good efficiency out of Daniyel Ngata this year. He's averaging 5.1 yards per carry for his career. He was at 5.5 last year. I think he's going to sit somewhere in that range again. I think he's going to be over 5 yards a carry. I think he could flirt with 5.5 again. I just feel like Arizona State should be able to do a really good job of keeping their running backs fresh and being able to mix in Emory Jones as well. Remember, I predicted yesterday for Emory Jones that he was going to finish with 700 yards. So thus far, I have two guys who are finishing in that 700-yard range. I think that that's a totally attainable number for Daniyel Ngata. Rushing touchdowns, again, in a scenario where he's the dog, I'm going 10. I think double digits is very attainable for him. Rachaad White had 14 last year. For the low, I'm going to say 2 just because, and Rachaad White had 15, excuse me. He had 15 rushing touchdowns. The reason I'm going 2 is a couple of reasons. One, Arizona State's offense may just not be able to put up touchdowns. You know, it might not be a Daniyel Ngata thing. It might not be a Xazavien Valladay thing. It might just be an offensive thing. As a collective, they just may not be able to get into the end zone that much this year. It's a reality we might have to face. So that's my low for one reason. My other reason is, again, what I've been saying, is if he is like for sure the number 2 back and is getting number 2 carries, he's not going to get a lot of end zone work because Valladay is a nice big runner. So my prediction here, I'm going to go on the higher side. I'm going to say 7. I think that if you're looking at the frame of work that he has, right? He's a very, very good runner, and he has found himself into the end zone. Again, last year he only had 56 carries, and he still managed to score 4 times on the ground. For argument's sake, if you were to take him and Chip Trayanum's numbers together, that's 10 rushing touchdowns, basically as 2A, 2B, because Rachaad White was de facto number 1, and Chip and Ngata were definitely kind of in interchangeable roles here. I feel like 10 is a lot as a starter. Even in a part-time role or like a 1A, 1B role, I think that 7 is a very, very attainable number for him. So far, predicting Daniyel Ngata with 700 rushing yards and 7 touchdowns. Nice and efficient. 1 touchdown every 100 yards. I feel like that's just super realistic, honestly. And I wouldn't be surprised if those numbers were better because I think Arizona State is going to be a very, very run-heavy team this year. And because of that, and because you have, very talented runners, like I will continue to pound on the table how good Daniyel Ngata is. Because of that, you should be able to be in a very good situation where you can set up Ngata to succeed. Let's go ahead and hop into our first break here. When we return, we're going to dive into the receiving side of things for Daniyel Ngata. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. From the people who invented healthy and tasty comes the latest gift to your taste buds. You've probably tried the amazing coconut brownie chunk Built Bar, but guess what? Your friends at Built have given coconut brownie chunk the Puffs treatment now. That's right. The coconut brownie chunk Built Bar you love in a deliciously chewy marshmallow covered in 100% real chocolate. It's like a fluffy cloud of coconut brownie goodness. But stop drooling and listen. They're good for you too. Low calorie, high sugar, high protein, and all delicious. Coconut brownie chunk puffs are here for a limited time. Go to built.com right now and make sure you don't miss out. They're going fast because they're truly amazing. All Built Bars are made with collagen protein, which your body absorbs more efficiently and provides tons of health benefits. So eat something that tastes good and is good for you. The best part about Built Puffs is, of course, they taste amazing, but you can enjoy them guilt-free because they're actually good for you. They're a perfect treat, perfect for when you got a craving, you need to satisfy your sweet tooth, or you need a quick, healthy snack. They're an excellent source of protein. Delicious coconut, rich, sweet brownie, creamy marshmallow. Stop fantasizing. Get to built.com to order your box of coconut brownie chunk Built Puffs right now. Go to built.com and use the promo code LOCKED15 and get 15% off your order. Again, that's promo code LOCKED15 for 15% off at built.com. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made. Search now for the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft and get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey Sports experts, the draft experts of the Locked On NBA Big Board. The 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. Make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen today. Let's go ahead and get right back into our conversation here about Daniyel Ngata. This time, turn it over to the receiving game. I'm not going to lie, this is going to be a pretty short conversation because I don't envision Ngata having a massive role on the team in the receiving game. Now, in 12 games in his career, he has 5 catches. It's not a lot of volume. It's barely not even a catch every other game. So Ngata has not been heavily used. For what it's worth, he is averaging 9 a catch, but I mean, a big chunk of that came on a 16-yard reception that he had in 2020. So overall, he's just not shown off the ability to be a great receiver. But, in devil's advocate, he hasn't really had the opportunity to show that off. So in Chip Trayanum's time, if we're just, again, playing devil's advocate here, same thing, only 5 catches in his 2 seasons with Arizona State. But then you look at Rachaad White, and White managed 51 catches in his 2 years at Arizona State. But to White's defense, I mean, that's an elite receiver. If you can find some kind of middle ground between elite and not great, I'd be happy with it. The good news for Arizona State is Xazavien Valladay is an elite, or at least a very good receiving back, which unfortunately for Ngata is going to take away a lot of those opportunities. I think he is going to be kind of pigeonholed in a 5 to 10 catch range this year. I just don't envision a very large role for him in the passing game. Now, this could be up to change depending on how the offense wants to run. There's a lot of uncertainty at the wide receiver spot, as we know. Like I'm betting on Cam Johnson to potentially be the team's number 1 receiver, and I do still really like Brian Thompson. But other than that, I mean, it's just a lot of uncertainty and a lot of moving parts that don't necessarily have fits yet. This could lead to more dump-off options, right? This could lead to more opportunities for the running backs to get more involved in the offense. Get these guys the ball in more ways than one. When you have guys that are as talented as Daniyel Ngata, you don't necessarily want to pigeonhole him in a situation where it's like, we're only going to use you as a runner. Right now, sure, it makes sense because you don't know, but you won't know unless you try, which could lead to a lot more touches for Ngata. Regardless, I'm going into this situation right now with the impression that he's not going to be heavily involved in the passing game, if for no other reason than because I anticipate Xazavien Valladay to be that guy. Highest potential here, 20 receptions. And I feel like that's an absurd amount for Daniyel Ngata, considering the frame of work that he has, or lack thereof. The low, I say 5, and I feel like that's honestly pretty spot on. But I think for my prediction, I'm going to give him the benefit of the doubt in the sense of I think he's going to get some opportunities, and we'll see what he does with them. I'm not saying he's going to squander the opportunity. I'm just making predictions right now with no context on how the season's going to play out. I'm going to give him 10. I'm going to say 10 receptions here. Looking at the receiving yards, each of these nice and boring. I'm predicting 10 yards a catch for each of these, best case scenario. So 200 yards in a best case scenario on those 20 catches, 50 yards in a worst case scenario on the 5 catches. My prediction is 100 yards on the 10 catches that he has. Again, nothing that's really going to blow you out of the water here. But I think this is definitely just kind of the situation that Ngata is going to find himself in. Is I think he'll be efficient as a pass catcher because he has shown the ability to be a rock solid pass catcher. It's just one of those things where is he going to get the volume? That's the only problem he's going to be running into here. For what it's worth on the touchdowns, I didn't really dive into this. I think he snags one. I think he finds his way into the end zone once as a receiver. Worst case scenario, obviously he doesn't get in. It's just black and white. Best case scenario, 2 or 3. This isn't a guy who's going to lead running backs in receiving touchdowns. Not even on his team, let alone in the Pac-12 or the NCAA entirely. It's not a Daniyel Ngata problem. It's just I do not anticipate the volume to be there for him. He's just, to me, he's probably not going to be the go-to option here as like the must do, must use kind of guy for. I'm totally stumbling on words as your receiving back, not when you have a guy like Valladay. So let's go ahead and put a pin in that conversation. When we return for the third and final segment, we're going to go ahead and finish up our predictions overall for Daniyel Ngata in 2022. This is the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. The first picks of the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft have been made, so you need to search for the Ultimate NBA Mock Draft right now and get over 50 insiders, the Odyssey sports experts, the draft experts of the Locked On NBA Big Board. This 5-episode Ultimate NBA Mock Draft is underway. Make Ultimate NBA Mock Draft your second listen today. Make sure that you don't miss out on that, guys. Speaking of which, one live NBA show is not enough for Locked On. The entire NBA channel is going live on NBA Draft Night. So if you have your favorite NBA team, make sure you subscribe now to their Locked On YouTube channel and get notified when they go live on NBA Draft Night. You don't want to miss this, guys. Who knows? Maybe we see some Sun Devils sneak in. You never know. Maybe your Phoenix Suns, your hometown team, is able to make your dreams come true and take our guys Marion Jackson or Kamani Lawrence. I don't know. Who knows? Not me. I certainly don't know. Speaking of things I don't know, predictions. Total yards. So rushing, receiving. Daniyel Ngata is not going to get touches in the return game. He has never gotten a touch as a return man, and he is not going to have touches as a return man. I'm going, and this is me combining my totals here. A high that I see is probably about 1,400 to 1,500 yards. If I'm doing straight off my predictions, and it would be 1,400. If I was letting my heart guide me, I'd probably lean closer to 1,500 because I think that he could be that 1,200-yard rusher and find a way to add on a lot more in the receiving game than maybe we anticipate. But 1,400 definitely feels like a ceiling here. 1,500 is a dream. On the low side, I feel like this is a guy who's not even going to scrape, 600 yards or 700 yards, excuse me. So combining my totals, this would be a 650-yard guy. Unfortunately, that could be a reality here. Overall, my prediction's 800. The 700 rushing yards I'm predicting him with, plus the 100 receiving yards I got, gives him 800. That's a very good season as a guy who could very well be the third option in the run game and the second option at the running back position. I feel like that's a really, really, really solid year for Daniyel Ngata. Total touchdowns, highest upside here. I'm going 15, and this is like an insane amount because my high on rushing touchdowns is 10. when I was talking about the receiving touchdowns, I said, 2 to 3. In an extreme scenario, I think that Ngata could possibly find his way into the end zone a few more times than my actual predictions that I have written down say. I think 15 would be just an absurd year for him. As a low, I'm gonna say 3, 2 or 3, somewhere in that ballpark. You don't have any of the receiving touchdowns. And for my predictions, I said 2. So yeah, like 2 to 3, somewhere in that ballpark. There's a chance that he just doesn't get on the field as much, depending on what happens ahead of him or what the offense looks like. Overall, my prediction, combining what I said, 7 rushing and 1 receiving, I'm giving him 8 touchdowns, and I feel like that's a fair amount. It feels attainable more than anything. Again, if you took Chip Trayanum and Daniyel Ngata's touches last year and decided to combine them, this is a 700-yard rusher, over 5 yards a carry, 10 touchdowns. All of those numbers could line up if he is de facto like 1A, 1B kind of runner. I think the biggest oddball here is not even Valladay. It's the guys behind him. It's Deontay Elliott. It's Tevin White. It's what's Emory Jones going to do? Are we going to get creative with Brian Thompson? I don't know. Like, there's a lot of things that Arizona State could do this year that might ultimately mess with the final production that Ngata is going to be able to get, both in the end zone as well as just flat out box score yards numbers. Overall, though, my final predictions, rounding those up, I'm saying 700 rushing yards, 100 receiving yards on 10 catches, 8 total touchdowns, 7 on the ground, and 1 through the air. I do think this is a guy who's very capable of 1,000 scrimmage yards. I think he's very capable of notching himself somewhere in that ballpark of 10 touchdowns. It really, really depends on what's going on with the run game. For all we know, Valladay might not be any good, and we have to turn to Ngata, and Ngata turns out to be all that in a bag of chips. There's a reason I'm so high on him. The reason I'm not blowing up my predictions is because I anticipate it to be such a busy backfield. If Valladay was not there, and it was Daniyel Ngata and everyone else, all the highs I gave you, the 1,200 yards, the 10 touchdowns, those would be my predictions. The highs would be way more. I truly think this is a very special runner that we have right now with Daniyel Ngata. The bright side here, we should be able to keep him nice and fresh. And if this is the situation, he may come back for his senior year, because I'm not sure if Valladay has another year of eligibility. He probably does, but who knows? Ultimately, this is what I got for Daniyel Ngata. I feel like these are pretty fair predictions, and he could very easily outperform those. But that is going to go ahead and wrap up this edition of the Locked On Sun Devils podcast. Again, thank you guys so much for making us your first listen every day. Remember, we're free and available on all platforms, including YouTube, if you would like to check us out there in a visual platform. Wherever you do get those podcasts, though, make sure that you hit the like and subscribe button and turn on those notifications so you get an update every single time we put out a new episode. If you're on Twitter, go ahead and hit me with a follow at Richie Brads36, and follow the podcast while you're there as well at LO_Sun Devils. That's going to wrap it up here for us today. But until next time, you keep it locked right here on Locked On Sun Devils.